You're tuned into the Spot-Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot-Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, discussing the Spurs' last three games, which included a franchise record win and San Antonio's first loss of the season. Dylan Harper joins the injured list, but some other injured players may be back soon. And finally, the Spurs through 6 games of the 25-26 regular season. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Spot-Up Pod. It's been about a little over a week since I last recorded an episode, and surprisingly, the Spurs have only played 3 games since I last recorded an episode, despite what feels like a long layoff since between episodes. But let's begin here with the last 3 games for the Spurs since I last recorded an episode of the Spot-Up Pod. So let's go back to last Monday, October 27th. The Spurs are at home hosting the Toronto Raptors. I do want to note that I am recording this episode at 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time on Tuesday, November 4th. So again, we're going back in time here to October 27th, the Monday. The Spurs are at home. The Spurs were favored by 4.5 points against the Raptors, and they ended up winning this game by 18 points pretty comfortably. They led by as many as 22 points, San Antonio did, and they held a double-digit lead for most of the game. There was little points for Toronto to kind of make a little bit of a comeback, but again, the Spurs ended up holding that double-digit lead for most of the game. Victor Wembanyama had a standout performance here, ending up the night with 24 points, 15 rebounds, 4 assists, 1 steal, 4 turnovers, and 1 block. And again, that 1 block is notable because we did see the Raptors try to penetrate inside, but they just did not want to put up a shot near Wemby. And that was the game where Harrison Barnes, after the game, kind of coined that term, derailed drives, how Victor would lead the league in derailed drives, because there was just so many times, and I put some film clips together over on the spotupshot.com where players were kind of just getting inside the teeth of the defense, but then they wanted no part of Victor. They would either scramble and kind of lose the ball or just try to find a teammate, and one of the Spurs other players would pick it off. So yeah, that was one of those games where we really saw those derailed drives, with just how much Wemby really scares teams for wanting to go inside and try to put up some layups or dunks against him when he's nearby. Also, before that game, Victor was announced the Western Conference Player of the Week for Week 1 because of his performances in the opening week of the season. And I do want to note the Spurs' notable defense in that game, holding the Raptors to 103 points. Then we move on to Thursday. The Spurs had a few days off, so now they're hosting the Miami Heat. The Spurs are again favored in this game by 5.5 points. They narrowly won this game by 6 points, and the Heat were coming in as a team playing very good basketball, like San Antonio. They both had top 10 net ratings heading into this game, so this is a kind of a matchup to watch for the Spurs, an early season test. So basically, it was basically a close game for the most part throughout most of the 4 quarters. There was a segment there in the 3rd quarter where the Spurs went on a little bit of a run and they ended up getting a 15-point lead, but then right in the 4th, Miami quickly came back. They got the game to crunch time, but the Spurs made enough plays in crunch time to hold on for the win. Now, this was a very significant win for the Spurs' franchise, because by getting this win and opening the season 5-0, that became the first time ever that they've opened up a season 5-0, and that was very surprising. With all the success the Spurs have had over the years, when they were in their title runs with Tim Duncan, very competitive team, led by David Robinson in the 90s, and just kind of those old Spurs teams too in the 80s and 70s. It was very surprising to hear that they had never been 5-0 to open up a season. So again, that was a notable win for the franchise, the fact that they opened the season 5-0. Stephon Castle and Victor Wembanyama both had big nights for San Antonio against Miami. Wemby ends up with 27 points in the night, 18 rebounds, 6 assists, 1 steal, 3 turnovers, and 5 blocks. Stephon Castle has 21 points in this game, 6 rebounds, 8 assists, 4 steals, 2 turnovers, and 1 block. Again, the Spurs is notable. The Spurs' defense must be mentioned here, where they held Miami to 101 points. So again, that was a very good win for San Antonio, playing the Heat and then, getting that franchise record there to start 5-0. And then we go to Sunday. The Spurs are on the road in Phoenix, and this ends up becoming the first loss of for the Spurs this season. So the Spurs were favored by 5.5 points in this game, but they end up losing by 12 points. And if you watch the game, you knew that for majority of the game, the Spurs were down by more than 20 points for a good chunk of that game. So basically, you have to give credit here to Phoenix. They had a very thought out defensive game plan that they really wanted to enforce, and really stuck to that game plan on defense against Wemby. And so what they kind of did here, and I did a big write-up about it over on the spotupshot.com that includes some film, is that they really wanted to swarm Victor anytime he kind of put the ball on the floor, or they wanted to have bodies next to him at all times, kind of in the paint, to not let him get into good position. They also were physical with him, trying to keep him off of his base, and so basically to establish this kind of a defensive scheme, the Suns needed the Spurs to have a poor shooting night from three, and so that ended up working out for the Suns. That, I mean, they couldn't see that was going to happen, but the Spurs did, just that. They ended up having their worst shooting night from three in this early season. So the Spurs only made 24% of their shots from three, just 26% of their wide open threes. Which again, that gamble worked for Phoenix because they could allow kind of cut off the paint from San Antonio, have multiple defenders swarm around Victor, and that kind of threw the Spurs' offense off. And then on the other end, since the Spurs were missing so much, the Suns got out in transition and kind of established against the Spurs' early defense, not letting them really set up in the half court. And then they had Devin Booker to look to. And also on the flip side for the Suns on offense, they just had an incredible night shooting the basketball. They ended up making 58% of their threes from outside, a lot of driving kick action. When they did get into the half court and kind of things bogged down, they could rely on one of their players, which was Devin Booker, who ends up with 28 points and 13 assists on the night. So again, the Suns did lead by as many as 31 points in this game. The Spurs' reserves came in with like 4 minutes left when the game was pretty much out of reach. I think the Spurs were like down by 19, and they ended up getting the game within 12 points. Stephon Castle was one of the players who had a standout game for the Spurs with 26 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, 2 turnovers, 1 block, and 5 fouls. Wemby, like I said, with the way the Suns defended him, he ended up having one of his worst games of the early season, which is season low 9 points, 9 rebounds, a season high 6 turnovers, and 4 blocks on defense. Again, I did a big breakdown of the Suns' defense over on the spotupshot.com, noting how their combination of swarming him with wing players, not really traditional bigs, where they had Royce O'Neal switch on to him, they had Oso Ighodaro, Ryan Dunn, all these players kind of be the main defenders, and then they had players kind of flashing nearby Victor to kind of swarm him throughout the game. And even Victor gave the Suns credit after the game, just saying that their defensive scheme was very impactful, really worked against he and the Spurs. Plus, again, like I said, the combination of the Spurs' ice-cold shooting from outside, that helped that gamble pay off. And I do want to say, too, that, this is something the Spurs' coaching staff will have to be aware of, is how some of these teams will kind of replicate what Phoenix did to Victor at times. And they're just trying to, all these teams with Wemby's new shot diet are really wanting to get inside, take, I think, almost 60% of his shots from the paint. This new focus from Victor of trying to score near the most efficient place on the floor, which is the rim, is making defenses kind of think of these different approaches of how they're going to guard him and try to limit him from getting as close as he can to the rim. So again, that's something for the coaching staff to monitor. And Kevin O'Connor of Yahoo had some early season data on just how much the Wemby and the Spurs have struggled against these early double teaming actions. And I also want to say too, aside from just not only how Phoenix defended Victor, I do want to say too on the opposite, on the Spurs' defensive end where they really struggled, I think that Luke Cornett's absence is being felt more and more as these games progress, where as soon as Victor checks out, teams are just getting to the rim, really attacking on the inside with just having Bismack Biyombo there underneath, and we're seeing Biyombo's minutes being cut shorter and shorter by head coach Mitch Johnson. There's times now where the Spurs don't even have a big on the floor, where Victor just needs a minute of rest or 30 seconds of rest, and so what they'll do is they'll have Keldon Johnson play backup center, they'll have Harrison Barnes, they'll have rookie Carter Bryant. So again, the Spurs are having to resort to small ball to allow Victor to get a short break before he comes back in. And then, of course, he's playing a lot of minutes on his end as well. So, again, that was just, again, very notable, the way that the Suns, executed their defensive game plan. Again, it kind of worked as well just because the Spurs had one of their worst shooting nights from outside. And so the Suns did score 130 points in this win, which is the most points a team has put on the Spurs so far this early season. It's notable that the Suns scored 30 or more in 3 out of the 4 quarters, where before this game, in the first 5 games of the winning streak, the Spurs had held teams to 30 or fewer points in at least 3 of 4 quarters, or in at least 3 quarters. So again, that was just a notable win there for Phoenix and the Spurs' first loss of the season. So overall, this past week, or these last 3 games that I mentioned, Vegas said the Spurs should have gone 3-0, and they ended up going 2-1 because of that loss to Phoenix. All right, let's move on to the second topic here, which is Dylan Harper's injury, and then also how help may be on the way for the Spurs with some of the injured players, how they might come back soon. So in that game against Phoenix, Dylan Harper was having a big impact off the bench, really driving inside the Suns' defense, and he ended up having 12 points off the bench. But then with 5 minutes left in the second quarter, Nick Richards kind of rolled on a pick and roll kind of play. Dylan Harper kind of moved into the paint to kind of help try to stop him. He couldn't stop Richards initially, and then Richards went up and dunked the ball. Harper kind of jumped with him, but then it didn't look like there was a lot of contact. But then when Harper comes down, he just kind of comes down hobbling on one leg. He ends up going to the locker room. The Spurs rule him out at halftime for the rest of the game. Then later on in the fourth quarter, we can see Harper, in a boot on the sideline. Then some of the reporters who were on the ground did report that Harper left the game in crutches and a boot. So then on Monday, the Spurs had Harper undergo an MRI in Los Angeles, and that MRI did reveal that Harper has a left calf strain. The Spurs did not give a timetable of when Harper will be returning, but some reporters had different timelines here. So Shams Charania of ESPN reported that Harper could miss multiple weeks of the season, and then Don Harris of News 4 San Antonio reported that Harper could miss multiple games or even a couple of weeks as well. So again, with how cautious the Spurs have been with the other players who are currently on the injured list, it wouldn't be surprising again to see Harper missing multiple weeks just because with this injury that he sustained, this left calf strain injury. Now, there could be help on the way for the Spurs in the injury department. So on Tuesday at practice in Los Angeles, Tom Orsborn of the San Antonio Express News reported that De'Aaron Fox, Luke Cornett, and Dylan Harper will all be out for Wednesday's game against the Lakers. However, there's a chance that Jeremy Sochan, Kelly Olynyk, and Lindy Waters III might be able to play in that game against the Lakers. Their status for each player will be updated after Wednesday's shoot-around, according to Tom Orsborn of the San Antonio Express News. So again, I do want to note that I'm recording this at 5:45 now p.m. Mountain Time on Tuesday. The Spurs have not released their injury report because they get a little bit more time since they're on the West Coast right now. And so as of right now, their injury report hasn't come out yet for the condition of those three players. But again, I'm going with what Tom's reporting here, that they could be maybe like game time decisions depending on what happens with the shoot around and how they look at shoot around. So again, there's a chance though that these three players at least they could be on their rejoining the team soon here, maybe as soon as Wednesday against the Lakers. Now let's go through the Spurs' options. In the event that maybe these players do get the green light to play, or maybe they're out again. So if Sochan and or Cornett, Kelly Olynyk are able to play, I do think that they're going to see some minutes. I think right away one or both of those players will get Bismack Biyombo's minutes, and I think we're going to see those players play in different lineups, off the bench, also maybe alongside Victor in different lineups as well. But I also think that they're going to be on a minutes restriction because it will be their first game playing, and they missed all of preseason, all of training camp, and so far all the regular season, so it wouldn't be surprising for the Spurs to put them on a minutes restriction. If Lindy Waters gets cleared to play, I could also see him getting some minutes off the bench alongside Jordan McLaughlin. We did at least get to see Waters III play in the preseason before he had that eye procedure that ruled him out for the start of the regular season. So again, maybe Waters III gets some minutes. Now, if either of those players are out, ruled out for Wednesday, then I think that maybe there's a chance another surprise player here could get some minutes, and I'm going to talk about who that player is. So if we look at the data so far through these first 6 games of the season, Stephon Castle, Dylan Harper, and Jordan McLaughlin have been averaging about 65 minutes per game combined. So I think that the coaching staff might consider giving David Jones-Garcia, who's on a 2-way contract, maybe some minutes with Harper now out for sure. So maybe Castle sees an increase in his minutes. I think he's playing like 32 per night right now. So maybe his go up just a little bit, maybe 34, 35. McLaughlin maybe gets a bit of Harper's missing minutes, which were 23 minutes per game. And then maybe David Jones-Garcia now gets a chance of getting those 10 minutes left behind by Jordan McLaughlin to keep the kind of, if Coach Johnson wants to go with kind of keeping that guard rotation intact, I think, again, he might look to maybe some combination of Castle, Harper, and maybe, not Harper, Castle, McLaughlin, and David Jones-Garcia. Or, like I said, he might go the other way and maybe give some minutes to Lindy Waters III if he's ready to go. Or maybe rookie Carter Bryant season increase as well. So again, there's all sorts of different options for the coaching staff to go with right now. Again, it really depends on the status of Sochan, Olynyk, and Waters to kind of see where they're at on the injury report. So we'll see what Coach Johnson does on Wednesday against the Lakers in Los Angeles. Let's keep going. All right, so now for our final topic, I just kind of want to go give some brief observations on the Spurs through 6 games so far. I do want to note that the data I'm about to mention was collected as of 5 p.m. Mountain Time on Tuesday. So there's a bunch of NBA games going on in the evening, so some of these numbers will change for the rankings for the team, for the Spurs. So again, the Spurs are 5-1 right now out west. They have the second best record in the Western Conference behind only the Oklahoma City Thunder. They have a top 10 offense, scoring 117 points per 100 possessions. They have the second best defense in the league, holding teams to 108.2 points per 100, and that's impressive considering that, again, they allowed 130 to Phoenix in that loss by 12 points to the Suns. They also have the fourth best net rating, outscoring teams by 8.8 points per 100, or to plus 8.8 points per 100. Now, I do want to note that I'm not going to really go too much into the numbers because, again, it's just a 6-game sample size. I kind of want to wait till they get to that 10-game sample size here next week, and then I'll have a bit more data to kind of to dive into and kind of do a little breakdown of how they're doing so far through 10 games of the season. But again, this is just based on 6 games of data so far. And so I will say that for the most part, they're really just taking care of business in their start. So here's what I mean by that, by taking care of business. Basically, in their 6 games, Vegas has said, if we go by, when the Spurs are favored or they're underdogs, they should basically be 5-1 right now based on who they've played and, whether or not they were favored. So the only 2 games that haven't gone according to plan were that Dallas game where the Mavericks were actually favored in that game and the Spurs beat them by 33. So that's one win that the Spurs picked up that they were supposed to lose. But then the loss that happened to San Antonio was that game against Phoenix where the Spurs were favored in that game, but they ended up losing. So again, Vegas says they should be 5-1, and they sure enough have done that. So again, that's what I mean by they've taken care of business. They've won the games for the most part that they were supposed to win, aside from that Dallas game, and then the Phoenix game, of course, didn't go to plan. Now, I'm just going to kind of talk about some of the rotation players right now, that just kind of how they've been playing. I have them in a few categories here based on their game score, which is I got from pivotfade.com, and then I'll just kind of talk about some overall numbers. So I'm going to say for these first 4 players, they're off to a really good start. Of course, that's Wemby, having an all-star type season already, 26.7 points per game, 13.7 rebounds. Let's see here, 4.7 blocks, 1.3 steals. I know earlier in the season he had started off with no turnovers for the first few games, but then now they've started to become an issue. But of course, Wemby's just being a dominant force, and he's helping the Spurs, guiding the Spurs through this 5-1 start. We've obviously noted his notable shot selection, how it's really changed, where he's kind of gone away from the 3 and really trying to get to the paint. Also being more physical this season, drawing free throws. So Wemby's off to a very good start, minus that that game against Phoenix most recently on Sunday. Stephon Castle has also been off to a good start. Starting for point guard right now with De'Aaron Fox out. Even when Fox eventually returns, I do think Castle will continue to start, next to Fox there in the backcourt. He's averaging 20 points per game right now, making 55% of his shots, of course, being physical, getting inside, getting to the free throw line with 7.7 free throw attempts. Right now, his 3-ball's been okay in the wide open threes. He's making 35% overall from his threes, but his wide open threes have looked pretty good, especially his catch and shoot numbers. 6.2 rebounds per game, 5.3 assists. We do want to note that he did have some turnover issues in the first few games of the season, but he's kind of gotten those just a little. He started to diminish those a little bit more, only 2 turnovers per game this past week. 1.8 steals, been very notable about with his physicality, his aggressiveness on defense, hounding ball handlers, kind of getting in passing lanes, being one of the standout players on the Spurs in both steals and deflections right now in this early season. So again, Castle's off to a good start. Who else do I have here? Keldon Johnson has been very impactful off the bench right now. So Keldon's averaging 13 points per game. He's shooting 61%. So again, finishing well when he does drive and finish out on the break. He's not a high volume 3-point shooter, just 2.5 attempts per game, but his 3-ball has been going in early in the season, making 47% of his attempts. And then I do want to note his rebounding, 5.3 boards per game, and specifically on the offensive end, where he's really helped the Spurs there with 2.5 offensive rebounds. So Keldon's off to a very good start. And then off the bench in his role. And then there's Dylan Harper, who unfortunately, again, he's going to be out due to injury, but he's been off to a really, really good start for a rookie. Let's see here. What do I have here for Harper? 14 points per game, shooting, making 50% of his shots. We see how much he's able to easily, as a rookie, get into the teeth of the defense and kind of attack there or create for his teammates. Let's see here. 4 rebounds and 3.8 assists and to 1 turnover. So again, Harper had been having a good, impactful start to his rookie season before getting injured. So now the other players I would say are kind of having an okay start. I was going to say Devin Vassell should have been in that first group that I just mentioned, but because of that Phoenix game, he really, really struggled. That kind of brought his game score rating down, according to pivotfade.com. So Vassell, again, he was in that other group, so kind of in between. Vassell had been off to a really good start in the first 5 games of the season. So overall, he's averaging 14.7 points, making 41% of his shots from the floor, 35% from outside. His 3-ball has looked better in some games. I think that Phoenix game really hurt his numbers because it's such a small sample size right now early in the season. 4.3 rebounds and 2.3 assists. Also had Yeah, and then making some plays on defense as well with his stealing ability, one steal per game. So again, Vassell was having a better first 5 games, but then that Phoenix, he kind of brought his numbers down there because he really struggled in that game. Julian Champagne's been okay as a starter right now. Again, I think this is a temporary role for him. I think once De'Aaron Fox gets healthy, Champagne will end up going to the bench. So Champagne's averaging, let's see, where we at, Julian? 7.5 points, making 42% of his shots on the floor, 30% from outside. He's really struggling on his arc threes. He hasn't made one this season from when I last collected the data. All of his makes have been from the corners. So again, he's out there as well for his defense, averaging 1 steal per game and helping on the boards actually a lot more, 6.2 rebounds per game. So kind of an okay start for Julian. Harrison Barnes, again, another okay start for him. He's starting, and I think he will continue to start. So he's averaging 9.8 points per game, 45% from the floor, 39% from 3 already in this early season. Let's see, 2 rebounds, 2.7 assists. Doesn't really fill the box score too much. He had a very impressive game where I think he was like 6 of 7 from 3 or 5 of 7 from 3. He had one standout game earlier this season already that was very notable, and then in that game against Phoenix, he kind of struggled as well. So again, he's kind of off to an okay start. And again, I think he will continue to start even when the team gets 100% healthy. And then I think these next 3 players I'm going to kind of say are having to play more than expected, I guess, in this early season, and this is more so due to the injury. So I think right now Jordan McLaughlin, we're seeing a lot of Jordan McLaughlin minutes right now, where he's seeing his minutes increase because of all the injuries to the guard position. So he's averaging 10 minutes per game, 3.2 points, making just 29% of his threes. And again, that's kind of the reason why they have him out there, is to spread the floor and kind of make those shots when they're presented. So, and then some okay passing numbers, 1.5 assists to 0 turnovers. But again, I think right now he's just having to play a lot more than expected. And eventually, once Fox gets healthy, once Harper get healthy, we'll see him probably out of the rotation. Carter Bryant's kind of just had some minutes sprinkled in there in the rotation at times during different games. Some games he may not play at all until the fourth quarter. So the rookie's averaging 3 points, shooting 36% from the floor, 33% from 3. Again, just kind of bringing that energy out there on the floor, but not playing a lot, only averaging, 7.6 minutes per game right now. And then Bismack Biyombo, like I mentioned, he's having to play a lot more than expected, considering that the Spurs were probably banking on having, Wemby, Luke Kornet, and Kelly Olynyk get all the minutes in the front court. But now, because of Kornet and Olynyk's injuries, as well as Jeremy Sochan's, Biyombo's having to play a lot more than probably expected in this early season. So he's averaging 8.8 minutes per game. Again, we're seeing his minutes decrease, game by game. 1 rebound. I mean, there's not much else going on there. And we've obviously seen how Coach Mitch Johnson has been cutting his minutes, further and further, to even having to resort to small ball, as I talked about a little bit earlier. So again, that's kind of just a quick overview of how the players are playing through just 6 games of the season. Again, it's a very small sample size considering we're just 2 weeks into the regular season. Make sure to visit thespotupshot.com. Now that the season is in full swing, I have my game notes and observations after every game that I write. Then the following day, I try to do some film breakdowns and also looked at some of the interesting numbers for the season as a whole for the Spurs. Looking at when my next pod will come out. So on Wednesday, the Spurs are going to play in LA against the Lakers. That's a road game. Then on Friday, they're going to host the Houston Rockets for the first NBA Cup game for the Spurs, and in this NBA Cup. That's on Friday. Then on Saturday, they have a back-to-back, second out of back-to-back against the New Orleans Pelicans, who I do want to note have not won a game yet as of Tuesday. And also, Zion Williamson has got injured, and he's going to be out at least 7 to 10 days, is what's coming out of the latest reporting. So, it wouldn't be surprising to see the Spurs either. So basically by game 9, I could either see that if they beat, I do think they're going to beat the Pelicans. That one they should beat at least. They should beat New Orleans. So if they can beat the Lakers and Rockets, they could be 8-1 next time I record an episode and through 9 games. If they maybe either lose to the Lakers or lose to the Rockets, just one of those games, then I could see them being 7-2, or maybe they end up losing to the Lakers and Rockets, which are again better teams that they're going to be playing here. They would be 6-3. When I record my next episode, and my next episode will be coming out on Sunday. So again, look for the next episode of the Spotted Pod on Sunday. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spotted Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spotted Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.